Boom shakalaka. What's going on, everybody? Randall here from Crypto Love, and I am joined today by Mance Harmon, the CEO of Hedera Hashgraph. What's going on, Mance?
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm honored that you join us today. We have got a lot to talk about with Hedera Hashgraph. But to get things started, let's talk a little bit about you. You have quite the illustrious background.
Well, I think that just means that I'm old. Okay. So about me, I am a computer scientist. I'm a techie at heart, and I've been working with my co-founder Lehman, who is the inventor of Hashgraph, Lehman Baird, for 25 years. We've known each other for a really long time, and we started our careers at working in machine learning, doing machine learning research. For the Air Force senior scientist for machine intelligence, so for the U.S. military, and then taught computer science at the Air Force Academy, and I was a course director for cybersecurity, managed a massive software program for the Missile Defense Agency, basically a simulator that makes it possible for the government to learn how to protect its citizens and allies from incoming nuclear ballistic missiles, believe it or not. And then we decided we wanted to be entrepreneurs. And so Lehman and I started and sold two companies in the field of identity. And I was a senior exec for product security for one of those, a Fortune 500 in one of those cases. And then Lehman went to work on this, what we're talking about today, in 2012. And he worked exclusively, for the most part, just on this problem of how do you achieve distributed consensus at scale in the most secure way possible. And I went to work for another identity company. And I was the head of labs and architecture for a company named Ping Identity. They're a global identity player. And then Lehman in 2015 had this breakthrough, which is today what we call the Hashgraph. And then we decided to commercialize it. I mean, it was perfect market timing, right? A great invention at exactly the right moment in time. And so we decided to commercialize it. And here we are now 3 years later with just an enormous amount of progress that's been made since then. Okay. So in short, Lehman, by the way, is a PhD in computer science. He's the smart one of the two. I realized a long time ago I was never going to be Lehman's equal when it comes to, the technology and the academic side of all of this. So I focused on the business and still did a lot of computer science stuff. And Lehman has solved all the hard problems, and the combination has worked really well together over the years.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, it sounds like the perfect combo if you guys have been working together for 25 years and still continuing to pump out stuff.
Still able to get along. Yeah. After all that time and all of that work. And yeah. Mm-hmm. No, we're great friends. We've been, best friends for decades now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So does he handle more of the technical stuff and you handle the business, or do you kind of swap?
Absolutely. No. There's no swapping. No. I'm conversant. I understand the technology, right? But I focus on all things non-tech, and Lehman focuses almost exclusively on the tech, and solving all the hard technical problems, ensuring the product gets built, and I do everything else.
Yeah. Well, that's a great partnership to have, to bring technology to market, especially since you guys are close, because to have someone focus on the tech and someone on the business, that way you can really get it out there.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a great combination, and it's worked really well for us for a long time.
Cool. So I guess everyone's wanting to know, tell us about Hedera Hashgraph.
Well, sure. So Hedera is the public ledger that is built on the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. It's interesting. There was a long time that I couldn't say anything about it, right? There's a lot of speculation in the market about what will a public ledger built on Hashgraph look like. And we went for many, many months just sort of watching this speculation of, people making conjecture about what it would look like. And most of the time, almost all the time, they were wrong. And it was painful to have to sit back and bite your tongue till we got to the point where we could make this announcement about Hedera. We got to that point in March of this year. We had this big event in New York City where we introduced the world for the first time to Hedera, and it's trying to solve as an organization and the technology, we're trying to solve really 4 categories of problems that we sort of observed in the market. And they break down really simply. So performance, obviously everybody's trying to solve the performance problem for public networks. Security, and we can talk about that. We achieve a level of security that is unique in the industry, asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance, which we could touch on. So performance, security, and then stability. How do you build a public network and manage it in such a way that people that are thinking about spending a lot of money building an enterprise application on one of these public networks will feel some comfort that the network itself is going to be stable and they're not going to be damaged through a potential hard fork of the network? How do you address that problem, right? And then finally, governance. What is the right governance body for a public network that instills trust in the market and represents everybody's interests? You don't want it to be centralized. In fact, you want it to be the opposite. You want it to be as decentralized as possible. And we have answers for all of that. And those are the 4 categories of issues that we've attempted to address with Hedera. And I'm happy to go through them if that's of interest.
Yeah, absolutely. One question that I had that you kind of touched on there. So previously, before Hedera, you had Hashgraph with swirls.
Yes.
So it appears to me like your potential clients are large businesses. So you want Hedera to be unforkable so that large businesses can feel safe putting their platforms on top of there.
Right.
Why exactly was there a tradition from Hashgraph with swirls to Hedera?
It has everything to do, believe it or not, this is going to sound crazy, but it has everything to do with our proof of stake system in Hedera. It's a security issue, and here's why. The math works out. So in a permission network, the consensus algorithm, the voting is just one computer, one vote. And because it's permission, that's okay, because you have to give permission to those that want to stand up nodes in your network. No problem. In a public network, you can't do that because anybody can stand up a node at any time. And if it were one computer, one vote, then a bad actor could stand up 1,000 nodes and overwhelm the voting. They could control the order of transactions. That's a security problem. The way we get around that is by using a cryptocurrency. And so our cryptocurrency actually provides the mechanism that allows us to eliminate the possibility of those bad actors from overwhelming the system and doing a Sybil attack, right? So in our case, it's not one computer, one vote. It's one token or one coin, one vote. Now, I'm building up to the answer to your question.
All right. And this is an as yet unnamed token that we're talking about, right?
The working name is H-bar. I mean, that you've seen this H with the 2 bars.
Yeah.
Technically, that is called an H-bar. And I mean, that symbol has a name. It's H-bar. And it just seems to fit with what we're doing. And so maybe they'll end up being called bars or something, but H-bar is the working token name. Okay,
cool.
So, but to answer your question, the way that we're solving this problem is the problem is how do you bootstrap a proof of stake system? If it's the case that you have a new coin, a new currency in the market, how do you prevent one bad actor from buying up more than 1/3 of the coins? And if they do, then they can prevent the network from coming to consensus. That's a problem. So what we decided to do was to create a council of 39 members that are the most respected organizations in the world that cross 18 sectors of business, It's not a bunch of banks. In fact, there'll only be 3, maybe 4 banks, right? But, tech giants and insurance and telcos and transportation and retail, 18 sectors of business, each company individually representing tens of billions of market cap and the very best brands. Create this council of 39, and they're all geo-distributed, by the way, and they aren't permanent members. They turn over. No member can be there for more than 6 years. Create this council, and then in Hedera's wallet, 2/3 of the coins are going to be held until such time that the value of the coin is sufficiently high that no single actor, no bad actor, can get more than 1/3. It's too expensive. They won't be able to buy more than 1/3 of the coins. Mm-hmm. And then when we achieve that, we can sell down the coins that are in Hedera's wallet as an organization. But you have to trust those 39 not to do bad things to you because they control 2/3 of the coins, right? Mm-hmm. So this is how you bootstrap the proof of stake system. But the reason we started with Swirlds, going back now to your original question, is that we knew we were going to have to bootstrap with these kinds of organizations. And therefore, we knew we had to start by addressing enterprise use cases and demonstrate enterprise value before we could get any of these 39 to agree. I mean, if we had just published a white paper and said, to the world's largest companies, come join our council, they would have laughed at us, right? Yeah. And so we couldn't start there, and we had to start with enterprise, and it has everything to do with this council, and that has everything to do with security and bootstrapping a proof of stake system. So believe it or not, it's a long chain of logic of why we had to start where we did, but we always planned on having a public network from day one.
Okay, perfect. And have you decided how high that 1/3 of the tokens need to be, what type of price you're talking about there until you can start releasing things?
We have not. I mean, the honest answer is no. I don't know what that number is yet. We won't make that decision alone. In fact, the point of the 39 is not just security that you can trust, the 2/3 that you can trust as a market, but also for them to provide expertise. And so we'll have a finance committee, and we will pull from the appropriate members, world-class expertise in finance and economics that will help us with those types of decisions. Mm-hmm. So, my background's not finance, right? And neither is Lehman's. But we now have a group. So the interesting thing is we don't just have a board of advisors, right? Like most of these projects have. They have a board of advisors. What we have is a board of governing members that have the access to world-class expertise in every part of business. And we're tapping into that to help make those kinds of decisions.
Mm-hmm. Great. A couple of things that I've heard mentioned about the council that I was wondering if you could comment on. So one of them is, so all the members are there for 6 years except for Swirlds, who's a lifetime member there?
Almost. So the term is 3 years. Each member has a 3-year term. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the first 3 years, assuming 2/3 of the members vote to keep somebody on for a second term, then you can have a second term of 3 more years. This incentivizes the members to actually contribute and play well with the other members. So you can have up to 2 3-year terms for a max of 6, and then you're out. And that's by design. We want new members in over time, and we want the members that are there now to know whatever decisions they make, they're going to have to live with outside of the council, right?
Yeah.
But yes, to your point about Swirlds is an exception in this regard, and this is one of the important and only exceptions, really, to how Swirlds is different. Swirlds is one of the 39. It has 1/39 of the vote. It doesn't control anything, but it is unique in that it's a member of this organization forever.
Mm-hmm. But so with the council, though, not everyone needs to agree on something in order for it to be enacted, correct?
No, not at all. Not at all. Well, there are different categories of decisions It would be difficult for me to just sort of spout these off, from top of my head, but
Mhm.
there are decisions that require 51% vote. There are decisions that require 2/3, 75%, and unanimous, depending on the implications of the question that's being asked. Yeah.
Okay, great. The other thing that people mentioned about the council was the transaction fees on the system from using
Sure.
Hedera. They go first to the council, and then they're distributed by the council instead of going straight to nodes.
Yeah, yeah. Those are for technical reasons. It has a lot to do with in the way, so we end up balancing the shards on a daily basis. Each shard has some number of nodes, 1 to 200 nodes, very likely. And you don't want any single shard to have too much weight. You want all the you don't want any single node within a shard to have too much weight. You want all of the nodes within a shard to have about the same voting weight. And so what we end up doing is ensuring that we balance the shards on a daily basis so that the nodes within the shards have the same number of coins within their wallet so that their voting weight is about the same. And part of that process is collecting and then distributing the tokens to the nodes within the shard and doing that balancing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a mechanism to ensure the security of the system by ensuring that no single node becomes a whale in the middle of a day and overwhelms the weight of the voting process.
Okay, gotcha. So with Hashgraph it's a DAG, so it's been compared with some of the other DAGs out there like IOTA or Byteball. In kind of layman's terms, can you kind of describe the advantages of Hashgraph over some of the others, or maybe the differences?
Sure. No, absolutely. So, yes, it's a DAG. What's important is not the fact that it's a DAG, but what the DAG itself represents. In our case, the DAG itself is a picture of the flow of information across the network. So we use a gossip protocol. And a gossip protocol is really simple to understand. If you have a large population of people and I have a piece of information that I want to get out to that full population, the quickest way to do that, the most efficient way to do that is through gossip. And so I tell you my secret, and then on the next time step, you tell somebody and I tell somebody, and on the next time step, each of those tell somebody. So it goes from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 32. It flows out through the population exponentially fast, this information. Our DAG is a picture of how that information flows through the network. The gossip, it's a picture of the gossip. Who knew what and when they knew it. None of the other DAGs represent that. And this is critically important because with that information, we're able then to use an algorithm, a voting algorithm, to calculate what people would vote on the order of transactions just by looking at the information in our local copy of the DAG. We can say, we can understand who knew what and when, and so we can calculate what Bob would have voted if we were asked to ask Bob to send his vote to us, but we don't have to. And importantly, every member of the community has the same DAG, the same picture. They're using the same voting algorithm. So they all calculate the same answers to what people would vote if they were asked the questions. And we all come up with the same answer. In other words, we're in consensus on the votes, on the order of transactions. So we know the order of transactions. And that's the magic, right? The magic in our case is the fact that our DAG that represents all this gossip contains the information needed to calculate votes. We call it virtual voting. And it makes us incredibly efficient when it comes to bandwidth usage. and really fast and gives us the best security in the market, asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance. And so it's the combination of the best performance one can get in a sharded solution with the best security. And it has everything to do with what information the DAG represents, not the fact that it's a DAG. That's the difference.
Okay, perfect. Now you touched on two important things right there: security and performance. So a lot of us know other platforms that use somewhat similar things, like Neo uses DBFT instead of ABFT. And so can you talk a little bit about the asynchronous Byzantine fault, and then also your the speed, your transactions per second?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the speed first, and then I'll go to the security.
Okay.
In all these cases, we have a replicated database. I mean, that's what the world of distributed consensus is all about. We each are running a local copy of a database. Call it a ledger, call it anything you want, but it's a database, right? Mm-hmm. A data store. And when I make a change to that, you and everybody else in the network has to get a copy of that change, because we want our databases to stay in sync. That's the minimum bandwidth that's required. Every change to the database has to go to every member of the network, minimally. So you can't do any better than that. What we do is add this tiny amount of information that describes who I just spoke with effectively. That's oversimplified, but effectively. And that tiny amount of information makes it possible to build this DAG, this hash graph, that represents the gossip that we were just talking about. And that's it. So it's a fraction of the payload, right? The transactions with this overhead, it's a few bytes of information on top. That's it. Because that's it, we're achieving what we believe is the bandwidth limit in a replicated database solution. What that translates into for us so far today is hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. We've published a white paper a couple months ago with all the details needed to replicate these same experiments, and we published the software, so you can go and do it on your own if you want to. Mm-hmm. And it was a global network, 8 data centers using AWS in this case. And when we started at 50,000 transactions per second, we were getting 2.9 second consensus latency. When we increased that to 100,000, we got 3.4 second consensus latency. And that's with 100% certainty. That's finality. It's not probabilistic like Bitcoin or blockchain generally. That's finality with 100% certainty. And a math proof, effectively, that says the order of transactions will never change in the future. When we moved to just North America, not a global network, but just North America, we were able to do 250,000 transactions per second, again, with 3-second consensus latency. Now, the fine print is that was just transaction ordering. That did not yet include signature verification on top of those transactions. And it didn't include updating the balances in the database. So if it's a cryptocurrency application, then updating the balances in the cryptocurrency application. However, what we did was work with one of the global GPU manufacturers to create a library that does signature verification on GPU. And they were able to achieve 1 million signature verifications per second. Wow. So on GPU, we've eliminated that as a potential bottleneck here. And in our internal testing today, just updating the 2 account balances is minor in terms of overhead. We don't think that's going to be a bottleneck at all. So we do believe that we'll be able to do hundreds of thousands of cryptocurrency transactions per second. And so that's performance. And then you asked about security. Mm-hmm. The asynchronous, the word asynchronous here is a qualifier for BFT, Byzantine fault tolerance. And what it means practically is that there is no leader, there is no coordinator, there are no timeouts or synchronous processes in the algorithm. If there were, then it becomes possible to create distributed denial of service attacks against the algorithm that can prevent the network from coming to consensus. And so if they're one of these choke holds, one of these places where you have to wait for 5 seconds, and if I don't receive a transaction or a message from Alice in 5 seconds, then I restart the system. If there's that kind of thing in the algorithm, then you can do DDoS attacks and prevent the network from coming to consensus. Mm-hmm. So we're unique in that we've eliminated those types of bottlenecks and opportunities to do these DDoS attacks. And that's why asynchronous BFT is so important, is that unless you can do a DDoS attack on a third of the nodes or more, mm-hmm. then we've eliminated a major threat vulnerability by becoming asynchronous versus everything else in the market.
Okay, great. So a couple, I guess you probably get these questions a lot because I've seen them a lot, I've seen them posed a lot, but things in terms of, being, now you've mentioned your open source but not open license.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Also,
sure.
Being patented, talks of decentralization. So, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talk about that because it seems like the overall blockchain movement is towards decentralization, open source, all of that. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that.
No, well, thank you. So it is interesting. All right, let me start with the open source piece, and then let's talk about the decentralization piece. Mm-hmm. So I think that pure open source combined with cryptocurrency is problematic, right? I mean, I'm a computer scientist of 25 years. I grew up with it, in the open source movement. Mm-hmm. And I got a bunch of friends from the open source movement, all right? And so while I buy into this notion that it's great to have a community that's contributing to a common baseline, and the community has an incentive in keeping a common baseline, a single baseline that's common. Historically, that's been the case. When you combine that with a cryptocurrency, the incentive structure is now changed from what it used to be. And what we're seeing now are a lot of forks of platforms that really add no value, mm-hmm. right? They're platforms that are being forked simply because it's been possible recently to potentially make a lot of money just by forking the baseline. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not always the case, and there are good reasons to want to fork the baseline sometimes, and I appreciate that and acknowledge that. But what it does is it introduces risk, and we think it's been one of the reasons why enterprise customers rather, have been reticent to build enterprise-grade applications, because everyone knows that the major platforms are highly likely to hard fork in the next 12 months, and maybe twice, right? And so that represents risk, because if I have an application running on this platform and my application state also gets forked through this process, now I've got my application running on 2 different platforms. And I've got clients out there that can become confused about which is the real platform and which is not. It creates chaos, right? So it's nasty business if you're going to spend $2 million to build an enterprise-grade application. Mm-hmm. Not to mention the fact that if I bought up a bunch of currency so that I can use that application, and now we've forked, well, I've just doubled the token supply, and that has a direct impact on the value of my currency. So a lot of problems can result from this. Mm-hmm. But we want to maintain the aspects of open source that are of value, and namely that is no license required to use the platform. So, we like the open innovation aspects of building on top of a platform without having to get a license from a business, and the transparency that comes with open source, right? Being able to look at the source code itself and review it And if I find a bug, report it, right? There's a lot of value in that. So we're doing exactly that. We're doing both of those things with Hedera. No license is required to use the platform. We won't even know what developers are building unless they decide to tell us what they're building on top of the platform. And with version 1, we're going to release the source code. Mm-hmm. Now, the patent is being used defensively here as a governance tool that makes it possible for the first time in the market, to my knowledge, to give developers that really don't care about forking the platform itself and, changing the platform itself. What they care about is having a stable platform. For that group of developers, we're making a commitment that this platform will never fork. As far as we're able to prevent it, and we have both technical mechanisms as well as the patent, which gives us a legal mechanism, this platform will be a single platform with a single cryptocurrency, and it will never fork. And that's new to the market, right? So we're actually creating an option for developers that they didn't previously have, while at the same time acknowledging there are developers that won't like that, and that's okay, right? We're not the right platform for them. There are dozens of options for them to choose from. Mm-hmm. But we think there's value in the stability. Now, in terms of decentralization, and by the way, just one final thought. While we sort of led the way on this line of thought and having this hybrid approach, I think this is the way the market's going to go. And I'm not the only one. If your listeners go back and look at tweets from Naval Ravikant a few weeks back, he is making the case that there are going to be hybrids because there are problems with pure open source models. Mm-hmm. If you're innovating and you've got a really cool idea and you open source this platform and the dominant platforms can just take that idea and include it and use it, you get squashed, right? The market isn't really efficient in the way that maybe it could be. And so there are pros and cons to both sides of this debate. But we're not the first. I mean, yeah, we are sort of the first. We're sort of the first to go down this path. But I think that other thought leaders in the industry are at least coming around to our way of thinking on this in some sense. Now, decentralization. There are two types, two parts of this decentralization discussion, right? One is, what is the group of people that are making business decisions about the organization that manages this global platform? You want that group of people to represent all interests of the entire market, not just the banks, not just the core developers, not miners. You want every sector of business that has potential use cases in every major market around the planet to be able to contribute to the management of the organization that is running this public platform. And that's, of course, exactly what we have. And what I would argue is that this is the most decentralized governing body of any of the public platforms by comparison. You just choose your public platform and look at who is making the decisions. Right? In some cases, it is the core developers, maybe influenced by the miners. In some, it's a foundation with a half dozen people in it. In some, it's a company with 5 people owning the company, right? So by comparison to all the other major platforms, I think this is the most decentralized governing body, number one. And then there is the voting on the order of transactions. So there's organizational governance, and then there's sort of technical governance. And what we want to be as decentralized a platform as possible is for every node in the network to be on par with every other node in the network. We don't want there to be master nodes. We don't want coordinators. We don't want any node. We don't want consolidation into a half dozen miners that control the hash rate of the hashing power of 70% of the market. Right? We don't want any of that. We want shards of hundreds of nodes, and each node within a shard has about the same voting weight as every other node within the shard, and there are no special nodes. That's pure decentralization in the voting algorithm itself. And of course, again, that's what we have. And so I know that people, when they hear about the council, their knee-jerk reaction is, oh, this is centralized.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it's understandable why they would sort of have a knee-jerk reaction, but my immediate response is, compared to what, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's centralized compared to what? Because everything else in the market, from my perspective, is more centralized than what we've built, both in organizational governance as well as in technical governance.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for touching on those. You mentioned previously version 1.0. So do you have any idea as to when that's coming out, and then anything else you have upcoming and in the roadmap?
Yeah. So our goal is to be generally available GA V1 by the end of the year. So I don't know if we'll achieve it, but we're on track right now to achieve it. This is this is new development. It's a complicated platform, and but it's been under development for years now. This is not something we just started. Obviously, we started this years ago, developing it. We're making great progress. We will be feature complete this month. Today's the 20th. We may already be feature complete. I'd have to check with the team, but we'll be feature complete this month for version 1 of the feature set. We have partners that are already beginning to build. Well, as of this month, they will be building their product on top of our platform using our public APIs. Mm-hmm. And so in the nearer term, meaning, a few weeks, maybe 6 weeks, we will, maybe sooner, we will release those public APIs along with documentation needed for developers to go through a certification process. So we're putting a bunch of educational materials online in the near term so developers can learn how to build on top of our platform. We're going to have hackathons through the summer. We're going to hit a bunch of cities and have hackathons through the summer. And then we're also going through security audits. I think there are like 4 or 5 different firms, third-party audit firms that we're engaging to test the platform in various ways. And we'll do that through the summer and into the fall. We'll gradually open up the platform to more and more developers. And and then there'll be this magic moment somewhere near the end of the year where we're V1 and then that's it. Then we'll be in the market.
Mm-hmm. Great. Sounds like you got a lot coming up. So I think big question on everyone's mind.
Sure.
Is Hedera the Bitcoin killer?
Interesting. Well, look, so Bitcoin is a special thing, right? I mean, Bitcoin is not a currency, right? No one claims anymore that it's a currency. Everybody says it's a store of value. Mm-hmm. And what I see are, major banks that are standing up trading desks to trade Bitcoin, right? And I see ETFs on the horizon. And so I can believe that there will be a lot of institutional money that's flowing into the market buying Bitcoin. And because it has so much momentum, it's really hard to say what's going to happen with Bitcoin per se in the future. It pains me to no end to know that we're wasting all of that electricity on something like this when it's not required. I mean, we demonstrated it's not required, but so is it a Bitcoin killer? That's a huge question mark. What I do think is that blockchain as an algorithm, as a piece of math, will diminish, right? Because if you just look at Hashgraph as an algorithm compared to blockchain as an algorithm, there is no sense in which blockchain is better than Hashgraph. And because of that, I do think that Hashgraph will gain more prominence in the future, and blockchain as a technology will diminish. That's not to say anything about the platforms that are built today on blockchain, because they're going to change. Mm-hmm. And and the underlying technology that they use will change, and they may persist and become major players or remain major players in the market. but just with a different algorithm and consensus layer. So it's much easier for me to predict what's going to happen at the technology level than to predict what would happen with any given company or something like Bitcoin.
Yeah, perfect. I just want to ask that question because, that's what a lot of the material was saying, or a lot of people were saying early on.
A lot of people are saying that, yeah.
Yeah. So also, where did the name Hedera come from? Is there a story behind that?
Well, Hedera, I wish I had a good story for that. Hedera is a plant, and it's a vine.
Ivy, yeah.
Yeah. It's an ivy, and it's sort of you could make the case that it sort of represents what a hash graph would look like, what a hash graph does look like, and it sort of weaves itself together into this vine, and that's what Hedera as a term technically, denotatively means, and we're sort of borrowing from that. It's also the case that it's really hard to name projects these days.
Yeah.
And when looking at URLs and trademarks violations and all this other stuff, that was quite the process, and so we ended up choosing Hedera because it checks a bunch of boxes, and it also is a vine, and we can weave this story together that's what it represents. But
and then if you want to name different versions, you can name them the species name of the Hedera.
That's a great point. Yes,
Hedera helix will be V1, and then
absolutely. When we have our big office, and we have different conference rooms, we can put different names of plants on conference rooms. Yes, cool. We're gonna do something like that. That's true.
Very cool. Yeah. So I've gotten all my questions. Anything else that I didn't touch on that you'd like to mention?
So the 4 categories we've already discussed, right? There's performance, fantastic performance, the best security in the market, stability, governing counsel. There's this one other property, fairness. You might have heard a little bit about fairness, and it's interesting because I think it's important that people begin to think about it. And that is this notion of, is it possible for any single member of a community to prevent transactions from flowing into the network, or to influence what the order is that the community ultimately adopts? And all of the leader-based systems and these systems that have blocks, like blockchain, they all have a problem with fairness. And the reason it's practically important is because when you're building certain kinds of applications, like let's take a distributed stock market as an example. If you have bids and asks flowing into the network, you don't want one person, one organization to prevent those bids flowing in, or to order, change the order of the bids to unfair advantage, because it's not a fair market. You wouldn't trust that market. You wouldn't use it because somebody could be manipulating it to unfair advantage. And it's not just stock markets, it's games. If we're playing an MMO and you and I pick up our guns and we're pointing our guns at each other, which one of us pulls the trigger first makes all the difference in the world. And so you don't want one party to influence that. Or an eBay equivalent, a distributed auction site, who pushes the button first makes all the difference in the world. So this fairness property is a really big deal. Nobody in the market talks about it because, I speculate, no one has an answer for it except for Hashgraph. So in addition to achieving the best security, asynchronous BFT, we also achieve, Lehman also created an algorithm that is fundamentally fair in ways that other algorithms aren't, in that no single person can prevent transactions from flowing in, nor can they dictate the order of transactions for the community or heavily influence that order for the community that they will ultimately agree on. And while that's not a major point of discussion broadly today, I think that as this market matures and these kinds of applications continue to be developed, this fairness property is going to be really important. So it's something that the community should begin to think about.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much, Mance. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and you answered a lot of questions for me, and I'm sure for everyone else watching.
Great. Well, thank you for having me and for the interest and for your viewers. And we'll look forward to, to going down this path and taking this journey with you and all those that are listening.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye-bye.